Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert in the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as share ideas for economic growth and prosperity. Today, we're talking about trade, tariffs, and competitiveness with China. Joining us today is international trade lawyer Herman. Mr. Herman has practiced international trade and investment law and policies both inside government and in the private sector for over 45 years. Mr. Herman was a member of the Canadian mission to the United Nations and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in the 1970s, and in law practice has acted as counsel for Canada in international courts of justice. Lawrence has advocated cases before the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, bilateral panels established under the dispute settlement provisions of the North America Free Trade Agreement, and in Canadian courts. He advises governments, state agencies, and international organizations on trade and investment issues. He is a member of the North America Forum for the Canadian government's Trade Negotiation Advisory Committee, chair of the Canadian International Trade Tribunal's National Advisory Committee, a member of the executive of the Canadian-U.S. Law Institute, and is a senior fellow and National Policy Council member at the C.D. Howe Institute, Toronto. Mr. Herman comments on international matters regularly on TV and in the Globe and Mail and the National Post and many other publications. Welcome to the program, Larry.
I'm happy to be here.
That's quite a resume. Before we get into Canadian and trade law and manufacturing, the viewers would love to know, what does an international trade lawyer do?
Well, we advise on all of the issues concerning the transfer of goods, services, technology, and capital between and among countries. It's based on the international agreements under the World Trade Organization, Canada's international treaties, etc., all of which affect Canadian business and, for purposes of your audience, Canadian innovators. Trade is a vital component of the whole range of issues that Canada has to deal with and navigate through, and that involves business and commercial activities in a major way.
So I provided a brief introduction about your resume, but tell us about your journey and what led you to becoming an international trade lawyer.
Well, that's a very good question. I didn't think it was going to be this personal an interview, but I'm happy to talk about it. Look, I joined government a long time ago. I was in the Department of External Affairs, now called Global Affairs Canada, and happily, having been interested in international law, studied it at university and at law school, I ended up doing international matters, international legal matters for the government of Canada. And I was posted, as you mentioned in your introduction, in the early days to the Canadian mission to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. After a few years, I went back into law practice, and I just continued to work in the international legal arena, both on trade and in other areas of international law.
Well, it sounds fascinating. We want to dive deep into the trade issues affecting Canada. But before we do this, can you tell us about some of the trade cases that you've defended Canadian companies? And we've just got about a minute before we have to go to commercial.
Well, a lot of my practice was involved in applying for anti-dumping and countervailing duties for Canadian companies, and in some cases, defending the application of Canadian companies acting for international corporations. But most of my practice was in that area, looking at how the trade laws can protect, safeguard Canadian companies from unfair foreign competition.
So we're going to dive right into all of that and what it means to Canadian manufacturing and Canadian competitiveness when we get back after commercial. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the trade rules and what the World Trade Organization has to say about subsidizing exports and dumping in countries like China into the Canadian manufacturing market space. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Don't go away.